Hello. Welcome back to STM Narratives. Before we begin, please comment where you are watching from and the time. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in the suburban town of Greenridge, a place with neatly trimmed hedges, freshly paved roads, and an air of peace that didn't quite extend to everyone who lived there. The sun cast a golden hue over the tree-lined streets as kids played outside, riding bikes, skateboarding, and chasing each other with unbridled joy. Among these children was Sam, a tall, lanky black teen with a warm smile that could melt even the coldest heart. He loved spending his weekends fixing things, bikes, lawnmowers, you name it. His hands were often smeared with grease, but his heart was pure gold. He lived with his mom, Miss Parker, a nurse who had moved them to Greenridge 2 years ago in hopes of giving Sam a better life. Sam was in his front yard tinkering with an old bike when he noticed a boy about his age, probably 12 or 13, struggling with a flat tire across the street. The boy was scrawny, with messy blonde hair and a face flushed with frustration. He kept trying to pump air into the tire, but it wasn't holding. "Hey," Sam called out, wiping his hands on his jeans as he approached. "Need some help?" The boy looked up, his face lighting up with relief. "Yeah, I think the tube's busted or something. My dad's not home to help, and I don't know what I'm doing." "No worries. I can take a look," Sam said. He knelt beside the bike, examining the tire. As he worked, the boy introduced himself as Max. They struck up a conversation, talking about their favorite video games and the best pizza places in town. Max was impressed by Sam's skill, watching in awe as he swiftly replaced the inner tube and patched up the tire. "You're like a bike doctor," Max exclaimed, grinning from ear to ear. Sam laughed. "I've had lots of practice. You should see my garage. It's like a graveyard of broken bikes." Max laughed too, and for a moment, the world felt as it should, simple, happy, and full of kindness. But that peace was shattered when a loud voice boomed from across the street. "Hey, what the hell's going on here?" Sam turned to see a man storming toward them. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and visibly angry, with a face redder than the setting sun. His eyes locked onto Sam, narrowing with suspicion. "Dad," Max said, stepping forward. "Sam was just helping me fix my bike." "Helping?" the man barked. "Or stealing?" Sam stood up slowly, his hands raised slightly, palms out in a gesture of calm. "Sir, I wasn't stealing anything. Your son's tire was flat, and I don't want to hear it," the man snapped, cutting him off. "Max, get inside. Now." Max hesitated, looking back at Sam apologetically. "But Dad." "Inside," the man bellowed, and Max reluctantly obeyed, dragging his bike with him. Sam could feel his chest tightening, a familiar knot of fear and anger forming. He'd heard about people like this man, seen them on the news, read about them in books, but experiencing it firsthand was something else entirely. "I know your type," the man said, pointing a finger at Sam. "You people think you can just waltz in here and take whatever you want. Not on my watch." Sam's jaw tightened. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, but he knew better than to escalate the situation. Instead, he took a deep breath and said, "I was just trying to help. That's all." "That's what they all say," the man muttered, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the cops." Before Sam could respond, a new voice entered the scene. "Hold on a second." They both turned to see an older woman standing on her porch. She was petite, with curly gray hair and glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. It was Mrs. Thompson, Sam's neighbor, and one of the few people in Greenridge who had always been kind to him and his mom. "Mr. Carter, what's going on here?" she asked, her voice firm but calm as she approached. "This boy was caught trying to steal my son's bike," Carter said, waving his phone in the air. Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow, glancing at Sam. "Is that true, Sam?" "No, ma'am," Sam said, his voice steady but laced with hurt. "Max had a flat tire. I was fixing it for him." Mrs. Thompson nodded, her sharp eyes flicking back to Carter. "I was watching from my window. Sam didn't steal anything. In fact, he was being a good Samaritan, something this neighborhood could use more of." Carter's face flushed even redder. "You don't know what you're talking about. These people—" "Stop right there," Mrs. Thompson interrupted, her tone icy. These people? Do you even hear yourself? Sam has lived here for 2 years. He's one of the kindest, most helpful kids I've ever met. Meanwhile, you're ready to call the cops on him for doing something nice. Carter faltered, his bluster momentarily deflated. I thought. You thought wrong, Mrs. Thompson said. And let me tell you something, Mr. Carter. Racism isn't always loud and obvious. Sometimes it's in the assumptions you make, the way you treat people who don't look like you. You saw a black boy near your son's bike, and you immediately assumed the worst. That says more about you than it does about him. Carter opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He looked at Sam, who stood there silently, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and strength. After what felt like an eternity, Carter finally muttered, I'm sorry. Sam nodded slightly, though the apology felt hollow. Mrs. Thompson, however, wasn't done. An apology is a start, she said, her voice softening slightly. But actions speak louder than words. Maybe next time, instead of jumping to conclusions, you should try getting to know your neighbors. You might be surprised at what you find. Carter nodded, his shoulders slumping as he turned and walked back toward his house. Mrs. Thompson placed a gentle hand on Sam's shoulder. You okay, dear? Sam nodded, though his eyes were damp. Yeah, thanks, Mrs. Thompson. Anytime, she said with a warm smile. And don't let people like him get to you. You're a good kid, Sam. Don't ever forget that. As she walked him back to his yard, Sam felt a surge of gratitude. The encounter had left a scar, but it also reminded him that not everyone in Greenridge saw him as an outsider. There were people like Mrs. Thompson who saw him for who he truly was, a kind, hard-working teen who just wanted to help. That night, as he sat in his garage surrounded by tools and spare parts, Sam thought about what Mrs. Thompson had said. He couldn't control how others saw him, but he could control how he responded. And he chose kindness. Because in a world filled with people like Mr. Carter, there would always be a need for people like Sam and Mrs. Thompson to remind everyone else what humanity could be.